Hello everyone, this is Chromý and together we will continue the course Interdisciplinary Approaches to Language and its Use too. In this presentation we will resume our discussion of variationist sociolinguistics and we will focus on the effects of age on language variation. The age variable in variationist sociolinguistics is closely related to the study of language change. If you already have taken a course on language history, you already know a lot about language change. Based on historical recordings such as scripts or printed books, we get a rough idea about a certain language in a certain time period. Based on a comparison between different time periods, we can find out what changed and what remained more or less constant. The crucial thing is that language change is necessarily related to language variation. Language change does not happen abruptly in the sense that the members of a certain community agree that they will all stop using a certain variant and start using a different variant instead. On the contrary, both variants must be used simultaneously in the community, at least for some time. This points out that the study of language variation can inform us a lot about the processes of language change. Basically, there are two ways how to analyze language change. The first possibility is to examine language change in real time. This is typical for diachronic study of language, when certain historical phases of a language are compared based on various sources. But this approach may be used even in the research of more current tendencies. We may conduct a longitudinal research and study the changes in the use of a language by selected speakers in specified time intervals. The second possibility is to base the analysis on the apparent time. This is a very important contribution of variationist sociolinguistics. It has been shown that we can analyze language change pretty well, even based on the way how speakers speak in one point in time. This approach to language change is based on the assumption that the speech patterns of a certain individual remain constant during the adult life. If this assumption would be true, it would mean that we may say that the speech of current 60-year-olds is the same as the speech of 20-year-olds 40 years ago. This would mean that if we would, for example, compare the speech patterns of current 60-year-olds with current 20-year-olds, we would see the change in the speech patterns of young adult speakers during the last 40 years. Now let's have a look at an example. This is a simple table from my own research on the so-called prothetic we. In Czech, people may use prothetic we before the initial or stem initial o. This means that a native Czech speaker may either say standard okno or informal vokno, and both variants have the same meaning, a window. The key finding of the research was that the use of prothetic we is on decline in Czech. In this table, we can see the results for speakers from a southern Bohemian city, České Budějovice. Altogether, there are four groups of speakers: older women, older men, younger women, and younger men. What we can see is that the older generation uses prothetic we more than the younger one, which points out to an ongoing language change. So far, it seemed quite simple. However, we may doubt whether the apparent time hypothesis is right, because it may be so that the speech patterns of adult speakers may in fact change in time. There are studies which show that the findings based on the apparent time hypothesis are very similar to findings based on the real-time examination. However, there are also studies which argue that it is possible that at least some speakers change the way how they speak during adulthood. Two possibilities are distinguished in this sense. The first is age grading, and the second, lifespan change. The idea behind age grading is that a certain speaker may change the way how he or she speaks independently of a general developmental trend in the whole community. Typically, this is seen as a reflection of various life stages which the speaker comes through. For example, the speech patterns of a certain individual may change when he or she gets employed and starts to work in a more formal environment, and so on. Age grading is not necessary and may not happen, but it is a possibility mentioned in the literature and has some empirical support. If you are interested in this idea, you should read an interesting study by Susan Evans Wagner, Age Grading in Sociolinguistic Theory. The second possibility is the so-called lifespan change. On the contrary to age grading, lifespan change happens when a certain individual changes his or her speech patterns in accordance to a general trend in the community. This would, for example, mean that when the use of a certain variant is declining, the speaker would also tend to use it less in time. This is quite important because it points out that the results based on the apparent time hypothesis may underestimate the speed of the language change. This is precisely what Gillian Senkoff and Helen Blondeau found in the real-time research on the R variable in Montreal French. Before we will conclude this presentation, I have one reading tip for you, and this is a paper by Guy Bailey and his colleagues who critically discuss the apparent time hypothesis and its use in variationist sociolinguistics. If you enjoyed the presentations, we would be glad if you would like them on YouTube. That is all from me now. See you next time.